If you find value in these stories, please support this channel by liking and leaving a comment. It truly helps me continue this work. Thank you.
The desert, a canvas of ancient rock and shifting sand, holds secrets etched by wind and water over millennia. It was into this stark, beautiful expanse, 40 miles northeast of Barstow, California, that Marcus Whelan, a landscape photographer, ventured on March 14, 2023. He sought the afternoon sun's unique quality in slot canyons, where light spears downward, painting the sculpted stone in dramatic stripes. Moving with the careful tread of one who respects the unforgiving terrain, Marcus navigated the uneven sandstone. His gaze, trained to spot the unusual, snagged on a jarring anomaly in a narrow crevice between two colossal boulders. A shape, organic, out of place in this realm of harsh geometry. He drew closer, eyes adjusting to the deep shadow. And there it was, a skeletal hand, fingers splayed as if reaching for an unseen salvation, wedged deep within the rock. The bones, the color of aged parchment, were partially veiled by sand and debris. On the fourth finger of the left hand, a gold wedding band gleamed, catching a solitary, defiant sliver of desert light. Time seemed to stop. Marcus stood, his camera forgotten, struggling to reconcile the impossible sight. Then, with a shudder, he reached for his phone and dialed 911. How? How did someone come to rest in such a desolate, forgotten place, compressed between ancient stones in a canyon barely marked on any map? How could a couple, last seen smiling in a road trip selfie 9 years prior, vanish so utterly that a decade almost passed before their discovery? This is the haunting tale of James and Rebecca Cartwright, 34 and 31. Swallowed by the Mojave on April 22, 2014. What began as a simple desert camping trip in Southern California spiraled into one of San Bernardino County's most baffling cold cases. They disappeared in plain sight, leaving behind their vehicle, supplies, and almost no trace of their fate. Hundreds of square miles were scoured by search teams. Volunteers returned year after year. Investigators chased every lead, every theory, every desperate psychic tip, and found nothing. What you are about to hear is the meticulous reconstruction of their final day, pieced together from forensic analysis, eyewitness accounts, cell phone data, and the chilling physical evidence recovered 9 years later from that silent slot canyon. We will uncover why the initial search failed, what investigators overlooked, and how the desert's geological processes can consume and conceal human remains in ways that defy all intuition. This is also a story of modern search and rescue, its triumphs and its limitations, and how the very landscape can transform into an adversary, a keeper of impenetrable secrets. By the end, you will comprehend the precise, documented truth of what befell James and Rebecca Cartwright, not as speculation, but as fact, painstakingly retrieved from the desert's grudging embrace. James and Rebecca's story began in 2009 amidst the chalk dust and camaraderie of a Pasadena rock climbing gym. She, an occupational therapist dedicated to pediatric patients. He, a systems analyst for an aerospace contractor, his days consumed by screens and a profound lack of sunlight. Their connection was immediate, their bond forged in shared passions. They married in October 2011, a quiet ceremony in Ojai, their honeymoon spent under the vast, star-dusted skies of Joshua Tree. From then on, the desert became their sanctuary, a ritual of escape whenever their demanding schedules aligned.
They were not reckless adventurers. Their excursions were carefully planned, marked trails, established campgrounds, diligent checks of weather forecasts. Rebecca meticulously documented their journeys in a detailed journal, while James, ever the pragmatist, kept their Subaru Outback in pristine condition and always ensured at least 2 people knew their precise itinerary. April 2014 brought an unseasonably warm spring. Rebecca had a 4-day weekend, and James took personal days to stretch it into a shared escape. Their plan was to drive from their Pasadena apartment through the Mojave, camping 2 nights near Rainbow Basin, then looping back through a stretch of BLM land they'd discovered online. On the morning of April 22nd, a Tuesday, the Outback was packed. Camping gear, food for 3 days, climbing equipment they were unlikely to use, and Rebecca's camera equipment. She was engrossed in a personal project documenting desert plant adaptations. They departed around 9:30 a.m., stopping for gas in Victorville, sending a flurry of text messages to friends confirming they'd be out of cell range until Thursday. The last known photograph of them, a selfie snapped from James's phone around 1:15 p.m. on April 22nd, captures a moment of shared joy. Both are smiling, Rebecca with sunglasses perched on her head, James's hand resting casually on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, the flat, endless expanse of the desert stretches behind them, creosote bushes, pale mountains in the hazy distance. The timestamp places them approximately 8 miles south of where their vehicle would later be found. At 1:47 p.m., Rebecca texted her sister, "Amazing light out here. Might stay an extra night if we find a good spot." That message marked the final communication anyone received from either of them. Based on the pristine condition of items later found in their vehicle and a forensic analysis of their planned route, investigators believe they reached their intended camping area around 2:30 p.m. They likely spent some time scouting, perhaps taking photographs, searching for a better vantage point or a more sheltered spot to set up camp. That afternoon, the temperature climbed to a warm but not oppressive 89 degrees, accompanied by a light southwest breeze. Every detail of that day was routine, unremarkable, the kind of trip they'd undertaken a dozen times before. Yet just miles ahead, in a landscape they believed they understood, the terrain held a secret, a deadly feature that would remain invisible until they stood directly upon it. When Friday evening, April 25th, arrived without James and Rebecca's return, Rebecca's sister, Amanda, began a series of increasingly frantic calls to James's phone. No answer. She tried Rebecca's voicemail. By 10 p.m., both sets of parents had been alerted. James's father, Richard Cartwright, made the call to the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, reporting them overdue. The challenge was immense. Somewhere in the Mojave near Rainbow Basin encompassed a vast, sprawling territory, and the couple's trip plan had been frustratingly vague. They'd mentioned several possible camping spots but hadn't provided precise GPS coordinates. Search and rescue teams were deployed the following Saturday morning. By that afternoon, the Outback was located. It sat on a dirt access road, approximately 3.2 miles from the nearest paved highway, deep within BLM land that likely saw no more than a dozen visitors a month. The vehicle was locked, undamaged, neatly positioned, as if they had parked intentionally, expecting to return. Inside, investigators found both their cell phones left in the center console. Rebecca's camera bag, containing her DSLR and 2 lenses, sat alongside untouched camping gear and food supplies. Their wallets, IDs, credit cards, and even the car keys were in the ignition. James's hiking boots were in the back seat, a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. What they didn't find was equally striking. No signs of struggle or forced entry, no blood or biological evidence, no footprints leading away from the vehicle. The ground was hard-packed, unforgiving. No indication whatsoever of where James and Rebecca had gone or why. The doors had been locked using the Outback's internal lock buttons, suggesting a deliberate act of securing the vehicle before their departure on foot. They had clearly expected to return, but where had they gone? And why leave behind their phones, their water, Rebecca's beloved camera? Search teams immediately established a grid pattern radiating outward from the abandoned vehicle. Tracking dogs were brought in, picking up faint scent trails that abruptly vanished on the rocky ground within a few hundred yards. A sheriff's helicopter flew relentless search patterns for 3 days. Volunteers from local hiking clubs and Rebecca's church meticulously walked line formations across the desert floor. They found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, not a single trace.
Detective Maria Santos, the lead investigator, later articulated the profound emptiness of the case in an interview with the Barstow Desert Dispatch. It was like they stepped out of the car and dematerialized. We've had cases where people wander off and succumb to the elements. You find them eventually. We've had cases where someone wants to disappear. You find evidence of planning. This was neither. This was a void. Theories quickly proliferated. Some investigators leaned towards foul play, though the locked car and utter lack of evidence rendered this unlikely. Others entertained the idea of a staged disappearance, but financial records revealed no preparation, no withdrawn cash, no hidden second identities. A few even considered an animal attack, but there was no blood, no torn clothing, and no reported mountain lion or bear activity in the area. The families, desperate, organized additional searches, hired private investigators, flooded missing persons forums, distributed flyers, and offered a $50,000 reward for information. Nothing came back. Search teams unknowingly walked past the same canyons, the same rock formations, the same geological features again and again, utterly blind to what lay hidden in plain sight. The first anniversary of their disappearance, April 22, 2015, saw Amanda organize a vigil in Pasadena, attended by about 60 people. Rebecca's mother, Ellen, spoke bravely of holding on to hope. James's father, Richard, was unable to finish his prepared remarks, overcome by grief. The case remained officially open, but the intensity of the active investigation gradually diminished. Detective Santos continued to follow up on occasional tips, a reported sighting in Nevada that proved false, a possible credit card use that was quickly identified as fraud, a psychic's vision of water that led nowhere. None of it yielded answers.
By 2016, the Cartwright case had settled into that difficult category, too baffling to close, too cold to actively work. Other cases arrived, detectives retired or transferred, and the original search coordinator moved to a different county. The vital institutional knowledge that comes from living with a case daily began to erode, preserved only in dusty filing cabinets and digital case files that fewer and fewer people accessed each year. The families grappled with their loss in profoundly different ways. Ellen and Rebecca's father divorced in 2017, Ellen later confessing that the agonizing uncertainty had rendered it impossible to process grief or move forward. James' parents became fervent advocates for missing persons, attending conferences and connecting with other families trapped in the same unbearable limbo. Amanda, Rebecca's sister, steadfastly maintained a Facebook page dedicated to the search, posting on every anniversary, sharing any news articles, and responding to countless messages, most of which were well-meaning but useless speculation, or worse, cruelty disguised as theory. Online communities periodically rediscovered the case. Reddit threads would emerge, dissecting the evidence, debating possible scenarios. Had they fallen into an abandoned mine shaft? Was there an undocumented well? Could they have been caught in a flash flood? Had they encountered someone with malicious intent? Each theory, however, presented significant flaws. The area had been extensively surveyed for mine shafts, with none found nearby. No rain had fallen that day or the day before, and the locked car, the untouched supplies, the utter lack of defensive evidence all argued strongly against a criminal encounter. What most people failed to grasp, what even experienced searchers sometimes overlooked, was the desert's extraordinary ability to conceal human remains. The Mojave is not a flat, predictable landscape. It is a labyrinthine system of washes, canyons, boulder fields, and fractured stone. Seasonal flooding violently rearranges tons of debris. Wind relentlessly redistributes sand. Rock faces spall and collapse. What is visible in April can be buried by July. What is exposed after a storm might have been utterly inaccessible the previous year. And then there are the slot canyons, narrow, winding passages carved between rock formations, sometimes mere inches wide at the surface, yet opening into larger hidden cavities below. These features rarely appear on standard topographical maps. They are sculpted by water erosion over decades,
often masked by overhanging rocks or buried beneath layers of sand and gravel. A person could fall into one and simply vanish from the surface world, visible from certain angles, yet completely invisible from others, depending on the dance of shadows, light, and the precise position of the observer. By 2020, the 6th anniversary, media coverage had largely ceased. The reward fund remained unclaimed. The case existed primarily as a footnote, a tragic mystery occasionally recounted in true crime compilations. Then came 2021, 2022, and into 2023, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years approaching. The desert, a silent accomplice, kept its secret. But geological processes do not cease. Wind erodes, flash floods rearrange sediment, temperatures cycle relentlessly between freezing nights and scorching days, causing rock to expand and contract, slowly, imperceptibly shifting what is wedged in place. On March 14, 2023, 9 years and nearly 11 months after James and Rebecca Cartwright disappeared, a man with a camera wandered into a slot canyon he'd never explored before, chasing the elusive, perfect afternoon light.
Immersive narrator, moderate pacing. Marcus Whelan had been photographing the Mojave for about 7 years. A software engineer by profession, he dedicated most weekends to exploring the desert, meticulously building a portfolio he hoped might one day transcend mere hobby. He was familiar with the major formations around Barstow and Ludlow, but his true passion lay in discovering less documented locations. On that fateful March 14th, he was working a canyon system approximately 3 miles from where the Cartwright's vehicle had been found, though he was unaware of that proximity at the time. He had accessed the area from a different approach, coming in from the northwest off a fire road known to very few. The afternoon sun performed exactly as he had hoped, carving dramatic contrasts between illuminated stone and profound shadow. He was shooting with a 24-70mm lens, moving slowly, deliberately, searching for compelling compositions. The slot canyon he entered was perhaps 20 feet deep at that point, narrow enough to force him to turn sideways in places. The walls were smooth, sculpted by water, streaked with the dark patina of desert varnish. He watched his footing, moving toward a section where the canyon seemed to widen slightly. It was then that his peripheral vision caught something in a narrow gap between 2 colossal boulders on his left. The gap was tight, perhaps 8 inches at the visible surface, widening to maybe 14 inches deeper within. At first, he dismissed it as a dead branch, its position somehow deceiving. But branches don't have joints. They don't have distinct segments. He stopped, lowered his camera, and moved closer. The skeletal hand was wedged approximately 2 feet down in the crevice, angled upward. The bones, intact, were held in position by the constricted space and accumulated sand. The fingers were slightly curled. Tendons and soft tissue had long since vanished, leaving only the yellowed-brown structure of the hand itself. And on the 4th finger of the left hand, the wedding band, gold, simple, still encircling the bone where it had been placed years before. Marcus's initial thought was that he was looking at something ancient, perhaps Native American remains, or something historic, archaeological. His second thought, however, was the ring. That ring was contemporary, machine-made, almost certainly purchased within the last few decades. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He was deep in a canyon, surrounded by unyielding rock. He took several photographs of the scene, scrupulously careful not to disturb anything, then backed out of the slot canyon and climbed to higher ground until a single bar of reception flickered to life. The 911 call came in at 3:47 p.m. San Bernardino County Sheriff's Dispatch immediately sent the coordinates to the nearest patrol unit and contacted the coroner's office. By 5:20 p.m., investigators were on scene. Deputy Jason Herrera, a 14-year veteran trained in backcountry recovery, was the first to arrive. He confirmed Marcus's report, secured the area, and awaited the coroner's team and additional support. What struck him, he later noted in the incident report, was the sheer invisibility of the location. If you were standing 10 feet to either side, you wouldn't see it. If you were walking through at a different time of day, the shadows would hide it completely. The only reason it was visible was the exact angle of the sun at that specific time, creating just enough light to make the bones distinguishable from the rock. The coroner's investigator, Dr. Lynn Hoffman, arrived around 6:15 p.m. with a recovery team. They set up specialized lighting and commenced the painstaking process of documentation and excavation. What they discovered went far beyond a single skeletal hand. Deeper within the crevice, approximately 6 to 7 feet down, the gap widened into a small, irregular cavity. Inside that space lay the remains of 2 people, compressed together, partially covered by sand, gravel, and organic debris.
The recovery proved to be an arduous 11-hour operation stretching through the night with specialized equipment. They meticulously removed accumulated sediment, photographed every layer, and preserved the crucial spatial relationships of bones and artifacts. What emerged was a grimly complete picture, or as complete as the desert permits. 2 adult skeletons, fragments of clothing, a second wedding ring, a carabiner still clipped to what remained of a belt, remnants of a canvas shoulder bag, and, sealed within that bag in a waterproof case, an SD memory card. Dr. Hoffman's preliminary assessment, later confirmed by comprehensive forensic analysis, indicated that both individuals had been deceased for approximately 8 to 10 years. The remains bore no signs of trauma, no broken bones, no cut marks, no bullet impacts. The precise cause of death would require further analysis, but the positioning and context strongly suggested a fall into the crevice, followed by an agonizing inability to escape. The wedding rings were sent for engraving analysis. The SD card was dispatched to a digital forensic lab. Within 48 hours, the confirmations poured in. The engravings matched. The photographs on the SD card matched those taken by Rebecca Cartwright's camera. The dental records matched. James and Rebecca Cartwright had been found, but what investigators uncovered in their subsequent analysis of the site revealed an even harder truth about how they'd ended up there and why 9 years of searching had failed to find them. The geological survey of the recovery site consumed 3 weeks. A dedicated team from UC Riverside's Earth Sciences Department collaborated with the Sheriff's Office to meticulously map the formation, model erosion patterns, and painstakingly reconstruct the surface conditions that would have existed in April 2014. What they ultimately determined was both devastatingly simple and profoundly tragic. The slot canyon where James and Rebecca fell had not been visible from the surface in 2014. The entrance had been concealed by a layer of compacted sand and small stones, what geologists term a desert pavement. This natural formation creates a hardened surface that can support significant weight, appearing to the casual observer like solid, stable ground. Yet underneath this deceptive veneer, erosion had relentlessly carved out a substantial cavity. Water, flowing through the canyon system over decades, had created a hollow space, gradually widening the gap between the 2 massive boulders that formed the canyon walls. The surface layer, however, remained stubbornly intact, even as the void beneath it steadily grew. This is a documented, terrifying phenomenon in desert slot canyons. The technical term is a concealed void. They are, in essence, natural trapdoors, stable until they are not, invisible until someone's weight is positioned incorrectly and the surface layer gives way. The reconstruction of James and Rebecca's final hours is chillingly precise. They left their vehicle around 2:30 or 3 on April 22, 2014. Based on the location of their remains relative to the car, they were likely walking northeast, possibly seeking a better camping spot or a more scenic vantage point for Rebecca's photography. The terrain would have appeared utterly safe: hard-packed sand, scattered rocks, the very kind of surface they had traversed dozens of times before. At some point, they crossed over the concealed void. The desert pavement held for James; he was likely a step ahead. But when Rebecca followed, her weight landed on a section that had been critically weakened by prior erosion. The surface collapsed. Rebecca fell approximately 15 feet, landing in the narrow, unforgiving cavity between the boulders. The fall itself might not have been immediately fatal, but the space was brutally constricted, barely wide enough for a human body, narrowing further at the bottom. James, hearing her scream, seeing the gaping hole that had suddenly opened in ground that moments before had seemed solid, didn't hesitate. He went after her. This act is profoundly consistent with every account of their devoted relationship. James would not have considered leaving her. He would have desperately tried to reach her, to help, to find a way out together. His second fall likely caused the void to widen slightly, but it also triggered a small collapse of additional material from the edges: sand, gravel, small rocks, not enough to bury them completely, but enough to partially fill the narrow passage and further complicate any attempt to escape. The photographs recovered from Rebecca's camera provide a silent, poignant glimpse into this unfolding tragedy. The last image, time-stamped at 2:53 p.m., is a serene landscape shot of the desert and distant mountains. The angle suggests she was standing when she took it, and its clarity implies she had time to compose the shot, that nothing was yet wrong. There are no photos of the fall, no images after 2:53 p.m. What transpired in the agonizing hours that followed can only be reconstructed from the physical evidence and a stark understanding of the unforgiving environment. They were trapped in a space roughly 7 feet deep and perhaps 18 inches wide at its widest point. The walls were smooth sandstone, utterly impossible to climb without specialized equipment. The opening above them, the very hole through which they had fallen, was too high to reach and partially blocked by debris. Sound would not have traveled well. The rock walls would have absorbed most noise, and the narrow opening would have directed any faint cries upward and away from where future searchers would unknowingly walk. Their phones, their lifeline to the outside world, were in the car. They had no rope, no climbing equipment with them on that particular walk. Rebecca's camera bag had fallen with her, but a camera is not a survival tool.
The temperature that night plummeted to 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Not freezing, but dangerously cold when trapped motionless in a confined space. Dr. Hoffman's forensic analysis, based on the position of the remains and the complete absence of trauma, suggests death occurred from a cruel combination of factors: positional asphyxia, being trapped in a confined space that restricts breathing, exposure, and eventually dehydration. The narrow walls that held them also compressed their bodies, making full respiration increasingly difficult over time. It would not have been swift. That, perhaps, is the hardest part to accept. The forensic timeline suggests they likely survived the first night, possibly into the second day, but with no water, no way to move, the body's systems begin to fail. Consciousness becomes intermittent. Eventually, it stops. The skeletal positioning showed they had been close to each other. Rebecca slightly lower in the crevice, James positioned as if he had desperately tried to shield her or provide support. The second wedding ring, James's, was found near what would have been his left hand, though the bones had separated and shifted over the years. After death, the desert's slow, indifferent processes took over. In the months and years that followed, seasonal rains brought flash floods roaring through the canyon systems. These violent events deposited layers of sand and gravel into the crevice, gradually covering the remains. Wind erosion relentlessly shifted surface materials. The treacherous opening through which they'd fallen became obscured once more, filled in with debris, rendered virtually invisible unless one knew precisely where to look. The search teams in April and May of 2014 had walked past this very location multiple times, but they were looking for surface evidence: bodies, clothing, footprints. They were not looking for concealed voids that offered no outward indication of what they contained. One search coordinator later reviewed his team's GPS tracks and confirmed they had passed within 30 feet of the site. But 30 feet in Slot Canyon country might as well be 30 miles. The terrain's brutal complexity hides what it wants to hide. Over the subsequent years, additional flooding events moved yet more material. Small rockfalls from the canyon walls added further debris. The site became more deeply buried, more effectively hidden, until, slowly, erosion and time began to work in reverse. The winter of 2022 to 2023 brought unusually heavy rains to the Mojave. Flooding through the canyon systems was more substantial than it had been in years. This powerful water movement scoured out some of the accumulated debris, shifted sediment, and subtly altered the configuration of materials in the crevice. This is why Marcus Whelan saw what he saw on March 14, 2023. The erosion had exposed the upper portion of Rebecca's skeletal hand, the one wearing the ring, and positioned it at a precise angle where the late afternoon light could finally reach it.
6 months earlier, it would have been covered. 6 months later, it might have been covered again. Timing in desert recoveries is everything. The landscape reveals and conceals on its own ancient, unhurried schedule. The notification calls went out on March 16, 2023, after dental records definitively confirmed the identities. Detective Santos, who had remained deeply involved with the case even after moving to a different unit, volunteered to make the calls personally. Amanda, Rebecca's sister, answered on the second ring. She had been waiting for 9 years for this call, though she confessed she had never truly believed it would come. In later interviews, she spoke of a profound, unexpected relief. Not happiness, never that, but the simple, undeniable fact of knowing. Ellen, Rebecca's mother, echoed a similar sentiment. We could finally stop imagining all the terrible possibilities and face the one actual truth, which in a strange way felt smaller, more manageable. James's parents asked detailed questions about the recovery, about the location, about what his son's final hours might have been like. Detective Santos answered as honestly as she could, carefully sparing them the details that would serve no purpose other than to intensify their pain.
The physical evidence was returned to the families after the investigation concluded. The rings, the camera with its memory card, fragments of clothing that had somehow endured. The last photograph Rebecca ever took, the desert landscape at 2:53 p.m. on April 22, 2014, was enlarged and displayed at their memorial service in May 2023. Beneath it, someone gently placed a copy of the selfie from earlier that same day, both of them smiling in the outback, sunlight streaming through the windshield, the desert stretching endlessly behind them. The stark contrast between those two images tells their story more completely than any investigation report ever could. Happiness and tragedy separated by mere hours. A normal day that became a final day, with no warning, no dramatic foreshadowing, just a concealed void in what had appeared to be solid ground. The recovery location has since been meticulously marked on geological survey maps. The slot canyon itself has been thoroughly documented. Warning signs have been posted on the access roads, though the area continues to see few visitors, and the terrain itself provides most of the warning anyone would truly need. Marcus Whelan, the photographer who made the grim discovery, no longer shoots in that particular area. He conceded that the light there remains beautiful, but he finds he cannot separate its ethereal glow from the indelible memory of that skeletal hand reaching upward, the gold band still in place, precisely where it had been for 9 long years. The Cartwright case is closed now, officially filed under accidental death. The desert, in its own deliberate time, gave back what it had taken, revealed what it had hidden, but only when erosion and time and one photographer's careful attention to light aligned in a way that made the invisible briefly, momentarily visible. That is how these stories end sometimes, not with dramatic rescue or elaborate crime, but with geology and patience, and the slow, indifferent processes of earth and weather. The desert does not keep secrets intentionally. It simply operates on timescales that render human urgency utterly irrelevant. James and Rebecca Cartwright went for a walk on a beautiful spring afternoon. They fell through ground that looked solid, and for 9 years the landscape held them, suspended in a space between being lost and being found, until finally the light hit differently in a slot canyon, and someone happened to be there to see.